Welcome to the Edges of Lean. I'm Bella Engelbach, and in this podcast we explore the human and creative side of lean thinking, unusual places where lean thinking is practiced. We meet people who are practicing continuous improvement in many different flavors and styles. So come along with me on a journey to the edges of lean. Episode 56, Continuous Improvement and What's Missing from Your Continuous Improvement Training with Amita Sherwood. How do people begin their continuous improvement journey? For many of us, it was in a training class, and many of us help other people get started by delivering training. How equipped are people after their training to tackle real-world improvement? Amita Sherwood has been helping people start their CEI journey for a while now, and she has some great insights into how we can improve that continuous improvement training. Amita Sherwood, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
Thanks, Bella. I'm so excited.
I'm glad to have you here. I'm really interested in the topic of training because I think that's how a lot of people start their continuous improvement journey, isn't it? You start out in some kind of a training, and that can set the tone for people's reaction to what lean, continuous improvement, Lean Sigma are all about. So tell us about how you got involved and interested, first of all, in Lean Six Sigma, and then about your involvement with training.
Yes, definitely. I agree. People's experience with CI often is based on what they were exposed to with training. So just a little bit about me and my journey with CI. So I've been actually working in continuous improvement for over 20 years now. I started at the very beginning of my career. I was with GE Capital in one of their leadership programs. It was called the Information Management Leadership Program. And these are 2-year kind of intense programs to develop future leaders. Particularly, this one happened to be within an IT kind of function. But within that program, one of the things that we were all exposed to was we were all trained and certified as Six Sigma black belts. And so it was for me really early in my career that I realized I loved this quality continuous improvement element. This IT stuff didn't seem to be so interesting anymore. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. At the time, GE had a pretty rigorous program around, what was then really just traditional Six Sigma. We called it quality at that time. And so it was an intense, 4-week training program, very engaging, a lot of, exercise and activities, but also very statistical in nature. And it was, I remember, I had some exposure to statistics in college as an undergraduate. And of course, I kept thinking, what is all this? It feels so theoretical, and I'm not going to be predicting the weather. I mean, I just remember we used to use weather as the example or the scenario. And it was when I got into that black belt training and experience where it just clicked as why using things like statistics really is valuable, when you think of work as processes, when you then collect data. So that really helped me bridge that gap from thinking statistics or feeling like it wasn't that valuable to really seeing where that value is. And so in the early part of my time with GE, really most of my time was spent applying the tools, and really working projects. And, in that environment, I will say it was a great environment to learn and to be exposed because they had a pretty mature kind of program. There were people to support you doing your black belt project work. But on the other side of it, it was pretty rigid and pretty structured. And it felt sometimes like you had to check boxes to complete, a project or to really get kind of whether it was credit or just be recognized that you were doing improvement work. So in the beginning, it did feel a little bit sometimes like the checking the box scenario.
Did you feel, and because a lot of people have talked about the GE program and the pluses and minuses of that program, did you feel that there was more of a focus on getting people trained and getting them those belt certifications than in making improvements in the organization, or was there a pretty good balance there?
So I will say, I think my experience being within this leadership program may have been a little different than maybe someone in the GE environment who was exposed to, Six Sigma and continuous improvement. I think the answer might lean towards yes for someone maybe in just a role that they were, that they were then being developed as, let's say, a green belt or a black belt. And yes, right, there was a focus on, there were, kind of structured and rigid requirements on what constituted certification, right? What benefits your projects had to have, and going through, formal toll gate reviews and panels and things of that nature. In this leadership program, I think because we were within this context of being built as these future leaders, I will say my experience was, yes, there was a focus on getting the certification, being recognized as a belt level, within the business. But I think I had some really good opportunities to apply the tools just in the work I was doing within IT. A couple examples, like, I was doing a project on IT infrastructure. So making sure, how do we make sure servers and databases and power sources were, we minimize risk in that infrastructure. And this was before so much was cloud-based and all of those things. But so, we use tools like FMEA to go through that process of identifying where those vulnerabilities were, then finding which are the areas that we need to maybe have some backups and some, backup power sources or whatever it might be. So I was able to really learn early on that it's really about just using a structured thinking process to do any type of work. It might be solving a problem, but it might be, in this case, figuring out where there's vulnerabilities in infrastructure. So I think my experience might have been a little bit more balanced, which may not have, again, because I think being in this program, we were just encouraged to, apply the tools outside of a formal project. So that I think was very valuable for me because it also helped me realize, there's not only one way to do this.
Right. And then what you were really learning was this way of thinking, and the tools that relate to that way of thinking are valuable in day-to-day work. It's not about, I have to have a project to get this work done or to use this. And I do think that is kind of an issue out of a lot of sort of traditional continuous improvement training is, well, you've got to do a project. Well, a project is a really good way to practice using the tools and especially practice the new way of thinking, right? But then if that leads to everything has to be a project, and the thing that I ran into in my company with doing this was because the business was moving so fast, you might start a project and then honestly, the business might go in a different direction. You would never get to finish your project. And I remember having some very frustrated green belts who literally could never finish their project because the business just decided to go somewhere else. But if you were using this way of thinking in your daily work, I mean, that's radically different, right? I think that's the intention.
And I agree. I think, what I still see, right, 20 plus years later, I still see, and when an organization, especially it's a little bit earlier in their maturity and CI, there's still this focus on, certifications and application to a project to get a certification. And I think there's value in that because there is you are applying, and you really, to me, CI is not about just the training aspect, right? And I know that's kind of what our focus of our discussion is, the training aspect, but that's just one piece of it. It's really about trying and just applying it, and sometimes applying it and making a mistake, and mistakes are okay too, because that's a way we learn. And I don't know that that's always something that, gets really supported as much as just, here's some training, go do a project. That's how you certify. And that's what this CI stuff is about, where I think over my several years of being, in CI, I've learned, right. That's not all of it. That's a part of it.
So you when we were talking about doing this podcast, you talked about things that are missing from training? What's not there that perhaps should be in training, or maybe not even in training, sort of the larger approach of introducing people to continuous improvement? So what are those aspects that you think that we're missing, that we should be paying more attention to?
Yeah, so there's probably several things, in ways to answer the question. If we're thinking kind of more just some of the training related aspects, I know early. So when with my experience being developed as a quality or CI practitioner, I think so. The black belt program, right? The 4-week program, that was something I went through with GE many years ago. And I actually ended up going through it twice because they shifted the approach to the training from a business unit. And then they did a corporate, standardized around a corporate model. So we ended up doing black belt training twice, which is probably unusual, but that was actually a pretty rounded experience. So what I mean by that is, we were exposed to project management skills. We were exposed to just basics of understanding finance. When you're working these types of efforts, how do you connect that to potential, benefits? Not always that they have to be something hard in nature. We were exposed to general like presentation skills. Right? How do you present? And we were actually, put through mock toll gates and presentations just to really build that ability to communicate effectively, because as we all know, CI has a language of its own. Mm-hmm. Not everyone speaks that language. So if we're not able to convey, a lot of times what I tell and share with people that I work with and coach, I say, okay, so what does that mean in English? And I know that's a US, mostly what I work with folks in the US, but what does that mean? Because it's one thing to explain it in our CI terminology. We can use terms of waste. We can use, sigma levels, right? We can talk about the standard deviations or whatever it might be. But again, how does that translate to someone that may not understand that, or really, be steeped in that again, or leaders? What's the key points? So some of those areas around whether it's presentation, leading teams, I'm finding as people who are younger and earlier in their careers are being developed, some of the areas that they seem to struggle with a little bit are just things like leading a team of people, especially if there's people on their team who are more senior to them, right? If they're more of an individual contributor, but they have managers on their team, or even just effective communication. I think we're in a world where we're so used to things like texting, emails. I mean, we almost think of in-person communication as that last, or sometimes don't even think about it. So just, that idea of how do we communicate effectively and make sure people are getting the information they need, but not only getting it, understanding it, comprehending it, and especially if we need some action behind it. So, some of those just, I guess people like to call them the soft skills. I don't know that that's always the best term, but
they're not. No,
yeah. Right. Because I think they're so, to do CI work effectively, it's not the technical tools and skills that are often where the gaps are. It's these other moving people in a direction, right? Trying to get people with different backgrounds, perspectives to move in a, relatively forward direction, to achieve a goal. Mm-hmm. Working with your leaders to communicate, right? What we're finding as a team, what I need from you as a leader, what changes should be made and why they should be made and why you should let us make these changes, things of that nature. Those are the things I'm seeing as kind of missing. It seems like these things have been stripped out and it's just the focus on here are the technical tools, we're trying to minimize how much time people are away from training. And so some of those areas around just team leadership, communications, maybe some basic project management skills, things of that nature just seem to have not be a part of this part development.
That is such a strong pull these days to reduce the amount of time spent in training, because when you were talking about a 4-week black belt course, I don't know that happens all that much anymore. If people are doing something that's a 4-week course, it may be an hour or two every day over the course of 4 weeks. It's not that long period of time away from your daily work. And maybe that's a good thing in that, if you take people out of their daily work for too long, you can kind of get almost in this fantasy environment, right? Where
Right.
you lose that connection with what's actually happening in the workplace. So, getting people back into the workplace as quickly as possible makes a huge amount of sense. But what you're saying, I think, is incredibly important, because when we think about why these initial projects struggle, sometimes it's because somebody is, they didn't do enough measure in their measured stage, right? But more often, it's because they had a hard time getting their data, because they didn't know how to sit down with somebody and say, tell me what's going on, share your data with me. If it's not something you can pull from an already available database, and how many of those really exist, right? Then not having those people skills,
Right.
that's really a challenge. And I love what you're saying about presentation skills, because one of the things that I observed, especially with, as you're saying, people who are newer in the workplace, was that sometimes at a stage gate, this would be their first time presenting to senior leadership.
Yes.
How terrifying, how absolutely terrifying. And even if senior leadership was doing their best to be kind, receptive people, it was still extraordinarily terrifying, right, to people to be able to stand up and tell their story and give that coherent story. So it sounds like Amita, that what you're saying, though, is in a way, training needs to be more comprehensive, but it probably also needs to be adapted. How lean is this? Adapted to the needs of the customer, who's the person being trained, right? So
Right.
somebody comes in, very strong in their communication skills, maybe they don't need as much support, but somebody who is really struggling to get the words out of their mouth, or the words down on paper, it's going to need more support.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, there's the view that, we need to standardize kind of training, right? Everybody needs to get the same or similar experience. And I see value with that, because you can't, it's really hard to manage one-offs, right? I don't know that we could really be doing unique, trainings for individuals. But I think that's where something like coaching is so important, because it's really through that coaching relationship that a coach can really then understand where somebody's strengths, where are the places that they might need some help or not feel as comfortable. And I've seen it, where somebody's really great with the technical tools, right? Maybe maybe they're an engineering background, and some of these concepts come much easier to them, or more comfortable, because they've seen it maybe in an academic situation, or they do a lot of this in their daily work, but they struggle with leading teams or communicating information to different audiences, right? Engaging stakeholders, things of that nature, facilitating, right? Working sessions. And those might be areas that person needs. Somebody else who's a really strong kind of project manager, maybe confident in leadership skills, but they do tend to struggle sometimes with which tools can I really apply to bring structure here, and there might be someone that kind of jumps to the solutions and is, so wanting to get to that point where you're, as a coach, right, just kind of asking them, well, how do we know those are the right solutions? How did you really get there, right? What's the evidence that tells us that's what we need to do? And then having to kind of somewhat bring them back to really follow the framework, the problem solving framework. So each person's needs and development areas are unique. I'm not sure all of it could be addressed in a training, but I think that's where that coaching is so important, because that's where I think at least for me as a coach of, for many years, that's where you learn where people's strengths and where their needs are.
Yeah. And as we're talking about this, it really is becoming clear to me that what we're talking about is in the context of the continuous improvement training and in coaching. If you can provide that, what you're doing for somebody is more than giving them that opportunity to, to put the green belt plaque or the black belt plaque or certificate up on the wall. What you're really doing is what you experienced in that leadership course in your first experience, which is how to be a better organizational leader. So someone who can lead a team, someone who can communicate a message, someone who can translate technical language into non-technical language for people who need it, and hopefully somebody who can see how their work fits into the bigger picture. So you're not just making belts, you should be making better leaders. And whether they're people who are going to end up being people leaders, or whether they're people who are just going to be, as a lot of people are moving in and out of different teams, doing different kinds of projects, because work is becoming so much more project-based, you're really helping them take that next step.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of think a couple of years ago, I'd written a blog that really just helped me reflect on, this 20 plus year journey. And I really thought of it as there was 3 stages that I felt like I really could recognize. In the early parts of a CI journey, there is this idea of it's about the tools, it's about the application of them, right? And to some extent, I feel like that is important because it's just how you learn to really apply the thinking. And whether you're, a DMAIC person, whether it's PDCA type approach, that just a problem solving framework, going through that. Then you mentioned, seeing where their work fits in the bigger picture. So then I call that next stage, like the bigger picture, and realizing there's more than just this idea of training, project work, but there's got to be kind of an infrastructure around CI work. It has to be really something we're doing that links strategically. We have to make sure our leaders understand the thinking, really, hopefully there's some behavioral change in them where they're asking questions and, looking for answers versus giving answers, things of that nature, understanding work as value streams, things of that nature, where that's something that's really critical. And of course, just this idea of giving people, not only empowering them, but confidence to just do CI at any time, right? There's no definition of what's the right way to do it versus the wrong way. Like, again, everything doesn't have to be a project. And then really for me, the recent several years is all about developing people, right? And that's one of those lean tenets, like the respect for people. This is CI at the core. It's just about people. And it's about people looking at things differently, right? Wanting to see improvement in their work, having some skill sets to do it, being supported to do it. It's just this idea of, like you said, just building people, developing people, and developing them as leaders, even if they may never actually be in a people leader role.
Yeah. So I think you've really like gotten to what I like to say is the center of lean, right? I always talk, this podcast is the edges of lean, but we often come back to the center, and the center is about it. It's about developing people. And by doing the work, you have all these opportunities to develop skills, to learn how to do things that help you be a better, more effective person that can go and solve lots of problems in all different kinds of places.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I think there's so much application of, being someone with a CI skill set, even just in our daily life, right? Personal lives. If it means we're better listeners, right? That's something that's going to hopefully benefit us in any aspect of life. If it means we, whether we serve a volunteer organization, we can bring our skills there. Whether it's setting up processes for your family to, to be able to, have a chore chart or have a way to consistently, manage things in your household. And there's just, I personally feel that CI kind of skill set, mindset, just has such a broad value in many aspects of our lives.
So if you were, and I'm sure you are, if you were asked right now to design, and I won't call it a training program, but sort of an introduction to continuous improvement for, let's say, for a new organization, how would you start?
That's a really good question. I would probably have questions, because I'm not sure I could just design one that says this is the right thing. Now, I think there are some general basics around, what does it mean? What does CI mean, right? And I would want to know, well, what is your what are your needs, right? Why do you think CI is going to help you as an organization? And for some, it might be, well, we're growing and, we're needing to really build more structured processes to meet that growth. For others, it's, we're really, profit margins really struggling right now. We need to figure out how to really improve that. In others, it's, we've got complaints, we've got returns. So I think I'd have to ask questions and then be able to try to hopefully set it up in the context that, well, based on where your organization is and maybe some of the challenges you're facing right now, here's how CI can and could fit. I'd probably want to talk a lot more about, especially at early kind of an intro to CI often starts with leadership level. I would want to talk more about what does it mean for you as a leader to support CI work, right? And maybe share, here's how you may want to, oversee CI work, about here's questions you may want to ask. This idea of, being able to observe and go to the workplace, but also going and asking questions versus saying, why are you doing it that way? So that might be something I would want to incorporate in, a intro with more of a leadership group. If it was more of a, whether it's mid-level or frontline level, again, try to understand what are some of your daily challenges that just feel like they're preventing you from being the best you could be in your role or at your job every day. Then based on that, how does CI support and fit that? And, again, basic, here's the problem solving framework, right? Here's some of the maybe basics around the language and the methodologies, but hopefully really try to make that connection of how's this going to benefit you? Why is this going to really help you? Because I think if you don't start with that, then people do see it as, I'm being told I have to do this. Okay, I will do it. And, sometimes that they're not as connected with that. It's really something that can benefit you daily.
Right. It's good. Yeah. Because then it's, well, this is what management is doing this quarter. If I just hang on, it'll go away and it will do something else next quarter. Right. So, so you really want to avoid that. And as you are digging into what's your problem that you would like to get solved, then you can build some really good buy-in. So it sounds like you're not saying, hey, take 5 or 6 high performers and throw them into a black belt, a green belt, and then black belt training. You're saying start with leadership and find out what they want to solve, and then get them to start asking questions and stop telling, which is a tough thing to do sometimes, Amita. So
no, and you can't teach that in a few hours maybe of time with leaders, right? In a training or an introductory discussion. You can't teach it and expect that happens immediately, but it's at least a way to start the conversation.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you and I had a little bit of a conversation about this, about using simulations and games in training. And I'll see this off with an experience that I've had a number of times with training with the kind of game where you put people into a fake process that doesn't work, and then you give them several opportunities to improve the process, and people usually figure out how to improve it. And sometimes you can do that with giving them a little bit of data and statistics work to do while they're doing it. Sometimes you do it without doing that, but you generally time how long it takes to do something and some measure of quality. And at the end of 4 hours or so, they have dramatically improved the process and everybody's really excited. My experience with that, though, is that people walk out of that room and go, well, that was really great. But honestly, we're never going to change our processes that much. And, they look at it as being fun, but useless. And I was wondering, what's your experience with games and simulations and training and the relative value of them?
So great question. And I think I see that being more of an aspect because there's, especially in the past few years, but, even longer than just about, since 2020, but there are a lot of organizations wanting to move to either an e-learning or a blended type approach. And again, I don't know that that's wrong. I think just understanding where we are with our technology driven world, you can't expect people to be in a classroom for 4 weeks. And even if they're spread across several months, it just, understanding this is probably just the way we're going and need to go, right? Even I will say, if I was asked to sit in training for days on end, I mean, I just don't know that it would be effective for me either. So, I do see the use of these games and simulations being much more present, in these types of blended learning programs. I like that they allow people to practice immediately. I really like that. I like that it's kind of a safe, neutral, everybody's focused on the same process. So I do think there's that value in that they get something to practice right away. They really get to see, the tools or the mindset or the framework in action. And, I think it's interesting what your experience has been. I don't know that I've gotten that type of feedback like, oh, this is great, but we're not going to have this same ability. I think part of it is sometimes through how are they facilitated? And if it's facilitated to be set up that, we're working on a simulated situation, this is meant to just help you see that, one, this is why it's called continuous improvement, right? You might make a small change and see that time got better or reduced, if that was the goal, or quality got better. You might see those measurable changes, but again, did it fix all the waste, right, or inefficiencies? And the answer is usually no. So then you might do another round and see that your needles moved even more so. And so I like that it teaches the fact that improvement work is continuous, that it's almost feels like it's really never done, because there's the needs often, whether it's our external customers, our internal customers, often change over time. Yep. And so I do like that. I have not particularly got that feedback of, well, this is nice, but, and then it feels like there's this gap. So my experience, I'd say, probably has been pretty good. I do think there's value in them. But I think it's also just, how is it facilitated, right? Don't expect that you're going to see some, huge improvement in, like we've simulated here in this environment. This is designed to be this way. But the real, do you feel like, or do you see that there was improvement? Is there a way to objectively show that did you learn right through that? And those are the things that are important. And it's how much you move the needle, and I understand that sometimes the organizations have particular requirements. So I don't want to necessarily ignore that, but it's less about, how the magnitude so much versus you made improvement, right? You followed the problem solving approach and process. You engaged others and people in this work, and you learned.
I think that's a great answer, Amita, because as you say that I think is what was missing from those sessions that I attended, was that it's about the learning that you're doing in here, about seeing, yes, you can do continuous improvement. It's not about, look, you were in this place of, when we started, this is how bad it was when it started, and this is how great it is now. When in fact, if you looked at it, it wasn't all that great. I mean, there was still further improvements that needed to be made. And so I think you've really hit that nail right on the head. It is about how it's facilitated and the intention of how you are teaching in that moment. Right.
And I think the challenge is, based on just this idea of the people are at the core, right? The idea is we should be learning, right? This is all about just learning and building knowledge about our organization, knowledge about how do we continue to add value or really be focused on value to customers. But the thing is, right, from a leadership and tactical, how do you measure that, right? How do you really
right?
And so I think that as much as that's what I truly believe is what is important, I know that often from leadership and just from the organizational perspective, that's not as tangible as, well, show me what the benefits have been from these CI efforts, right? What's the return on investment from whether it's training or doing these project work or investing in coaching. And that's, I mean, again, it exists, and I understand that, but I guess there's some other aspects that you sometimes just aren't measurable, or at least maybe not as objective.
They're not as, I think, immediately measurable. And so if you're talking about is the training and the coaching you're doing helping people become over time better problem solvers? I think it's pretty hard at the beginning to put a dollar figure on that, right?
Yeah.
And so if somebody comes around and they want that dollar figure for, having taken 5 people and 4 of them became better problem solvers, you're not going to be able to put a really good ROI on that. But, 3 years down the road, maybe you could, but it would, it's not going to be as some of my friends in accounting like to say, it's not going to be green dollars. It's not going to be dollars that you can take out of a wallet and count. It's going to be more like sort of the opposite of opportunity cost. Now you are able to address opportunities that you couldn't address before because now people are more capable in addressing opportunities, and that is hard to calculate.
Yeah.
There are always people in the organization saying, hey, this is important, don't forget it. But
right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What are you doing now, Amita? What are the kinds of projects or work that you're doing now?
So I would say a good majority of my time is coaching, people who are being developed in their practice CI skill set. Yes, some of they're still belt levels, right? So I will say, right, I still support, green belt, black belt kind of programs. I do teach, those programs as well. I do have some working with a good colleague that we teach programs at a university level, and and it is more of a blended type approach where we do weekly sessions, with RCI, practitioners, and yes, we do some teaching. They do some kind of self-paced e-learning. There is a project component, but there's some coaching built into that. So, I would say I still work and support some of that traditional, path. I guess the way I look at it is, how do I maybe, again, from a coaching perspective, and when I teach, how do I just build on that, right? How do I make sure I'm conveying everything we've been talking about when I do those things? And so, in a classroom setting, whether it's a virtual classroom or an in-person classroom, when we teach concepts, what I try to continue to reiterate is, for all of you, this tool may not be something you might ever use. That's okay. For some of you, this might make sense. I would encourage everyone to try it sometime if they want, right? If you have an opportunity to try it, and even if it has nothing to do with this project you might be working on, try it. And it's one of those, and it's okay. Try something if you don't like it, or if it doesn't work, it was not the right tool because it wasn't, you use a certain graph or a certain type of data, it just didn't make sense. That's okay. At least you figured that out. That is part of your learning. So just how do you convey some of these things, and some of those people related skills that comes out a lot, I think, in the coaching aspect. And those are the things I try to use questions to ask, like, so how have you engaged your team at what point have you talked to these folks, or have you brought in your leaders? And so hopefully it helps people get to think about, oh, I do need to go do that, because that's another area. Sometimes I think people get heads down and want to work their improvement effort and project, and they work it individually, and it's like, no, that's not really how this should be done. I understand there might be some things you might do to help move your team along, but really this is meant to be a team-based approach. So just even through that coaching, asking the questions like, okay, so when did you meet with your team? How did that, what did you work on with them? So yeah, I work on some of these traditional things. I am also working on more developing leadership, programs, and just wanting to really hopefully do more coaching, right? That's an area I really, really enjoy. I think because in this 20 plus years, I've gotten to this point of realizing it's just about the development of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that development, again, is, yes, some CI technical skills, but that development could be, communication. It could be how are they better facilitators? Just how are they better, leaders, right? How are they better at influencing? I mean, that's an area that I've really gotten to enjoy, is when you're in a CI role, you have a lot of ability to influence, even though you don't have this, any direct authority. So that's really important, right? How do you influence? How do you approach that? Because that's also another way people get maybe the wrong impression of CI if they haven't been, engaged in a way that has worked well. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. And I think there is this thing that happens, but particularly when people first get like bitten by the bug and they see how amazing it is, and they go and they kind of plunk it down in front of somebody else and say, isn't this great? We're going to do this. And the other person has not been on that journey with them, and they have no interest. They're not going to pick it up. They're going to be resistant. And that very first step of influencing is already, they may have missed their opportunity because their excitement is not going to be as influential for some people as perhaps some data or addressing the person they're trying to influence is their problems.
Right.
Yeah. So, I love that. And I love that you're really getting into it. It's about the people, right? And that doing a project is an opportunity to develop a person, not just to solve an organizational problem. Yeah. That's and maybe it's to develop more than one person. And that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Amita, what is the one piece of advice that you give to a young person starting out? And you work with a lot of young people, I bet. So what's your advice for them?
Yes, I am realizing that, there's a bigger age gap between myself and a lot of the people I work with now. So I think there's actually probably two things I would say to respond to that. One, I think you don't have to be young to start a CI journey, right? I think that's something that I've seen people mid-career, right? Maybe in their 10, 15 year plus, or even 20 year plus into their career, they're starting a CI journey. So that's probably the one thing is, you don't necessarily have to be young to start this journey. The other thing is it's something that it came to my mind is just this idea of, it's not about getting it right? It's about learning. So with younger people, I think I often feel like they're trying to get it right. Did I use this tool? Did I check this box? And, my advice is just, that's not what the focus is. It's the focus should be that it's learning. It's learning the skill set. It's learning about the process area, that you're attacking from a problem solving. It's learning about the people that you're working with. There's many aspects of that learning.
Wow. That's great. I love that. I love that advice. And I think that's really, really applicable to people who are, coming in through that academic environment, and it's all about getting the A's, right? And I'm going to get the A if I tick all the boxes right. But what's the point of getting the A if you haven't actually learned anything? So
right. And to your point, right? These younger folks may have been recently coming out of more of an academic environment, maybe now coming into being developed in a CI role. So they're used to I'm going to get graded, or, I have to do, get a score on something. And so this is it's different, but their mindset is still the same, right? Again, how do I do it right? And, the idea is there's not really a lot that you can say, this is the right way to do it. Here's a good problem statement. Here's a good goal statement. Here's the right way to use certain data, depending on what type of data it is. Here's here are ways to identify waste, right? There are ways that should be, that should kind of follow a certain path. But even then, it's okay that you got it wrong the first time you tried it, because hopefully you learn something by doing it.
You learn something. Every time you're wrong, you learn something. Amita, how can people find you?
So thanks for asking. There's a few ways on my company website. My company is E² Solutions. The website, it's kind of long. It's e2solutions.biz, B-I-Z. I'm also on LinkedIn. So look me up, Amita Sherwood. You'll find me. I do have a company LinkedIn page, unfortunately not as active on the company page. So those are the best places to find me.
That'll all be in the show notes. Amita, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for traveling with me to the edges of lean, and as it often happens, right back to the center where it's all about people. Thank you.
Thanks, Bella.
This is Bella Engelbach, and I'd like to thank Amita Sherwood for being my guest on the Edges of Lean. What are your thoughts and insights about training? What suggestions do you have for how to improve training? We'd love to hear from you. Find Amita at https://www.esquaredsolutions.biz or on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn or at leanforhumans.com or comment wherever you watch or listen and tell a friend about the edges of lean. Please join me in exploring more of the edges of lean. There's a lot to learn. And check out my friends in the Lean Communicators community at leancommunicators.com. You'll find more podcasts and videos with lots of great new content every week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelberg with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.